Mayor Allen, it is 3 p.m. You may start the meeting when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Can I have a mover and seconder to call the meeting to order, please? Councillor Cabral, Councillor Moore, that the special meeting of the Council of the Township of Springwater, November 25th, 2021, come to order at 3 p.m. All those in favor? That is carried. Due to COVID-19, Council and staff are taking the necessary steps to limit in-person meetings. As such, members of Council are participating along with staff and presenters electronically. The meeting will be live streamed, and you can watch the meeting live on the Township's website at www.springwater.ca. You can listen to it by phone during the meeting by dialing 647-558-0588 and using the ID 830-7454-1447 and the pound sign. This option is available during the meeting. And should you want to see the live stream after it has occurred, you can watch the video on the Township's YouTube channel. Does Council have any disclosure of pecuniary interest with respect to this matter this evening? All right, seeing none, I will now call upon Director Radigan to introduce the Resource Capacity Summary Report team. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to members of Council. We have CSPN here today to present a portion of the service delivery review and their findings based on the activity worksheets that were submitted through staff. I do want to start off by thanking staff for the amount of time and effort that they put into completing the timesheets. And I definitely want to apologize because I think I probably bugged them hundreds and thousands of times. So I do appreciate all of the work and effort that went into them. I just wanted to start off introducing both Jessica Cryer as well as Janelle McCoolosh. So Jessica Cryer is the managing partner at CSPN. She holds 12 years of experience in the management consulting industry. Prior to taking on her leadership role at CSPN, Jessica worked at Deloitte Consulting and Idea Couture. Within her roles, Jessica found her niche in strategic innovation and helping organizations deliver memorable experiences for their employees and customers. Jessica has extensive experience working with both private and public sector organizations to conduct service experience reviews, build strategies, and support design activation. She is well-versed in customer journey mapping, process improvements, training, and professional development. She has supported organizations operating in both unionized and non-unionized environments. Janelle McCoolosh is a customer service experience consultant at CSPN. She holds a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology. Her academic background and training spans many topics of organizational psychology, which puts the human capital at the forefront of organizations. Through knowledge of the academic literature and best practices, extensive research design and facilitation experience, and customer service expertise, she helps to enable organizations to improve their customer and employee experiences. To date, Janelle has worked with 4 municipalities on service delivery reviews. I'd like to turn it over to both Janelle and Jessica to present their findings. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jazz, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. We're very grateful for that. Janelle, can you please go ahead and share your screen for the presentation? We'll just give a moment to get set up here. Wonderful. Just bear with me one moment. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. And as Jazz mentioned, my name is Jessica Cryer. I'm a partner here at CSPN. We've had the opportunity to partner with Springwater over the past few months to conduct a service delivery review. The focus of this review was specifically around resource capacity. You can click to the next slide. So today, I just wanted to go over a quick agenda. As you can see, we're going to be spending the majority of our time on Q&A, but we will be sharing out findings both at the organizational level and the departmental level as well. Next slide, please. Perfect. So before we get into the findings, I did want to provide quick context into the objective of this service delivery review. As you recall, Springwater has gone through a service delivery review that was conducted by another independent third party just over a year ago. We had the opportunity to review that in detail and designed a project that focused more specifically, as I mentioned, on the resource capacity and the considerations related to that. And in addition to resource capacity, throughout this project, we're also going to be looking at key performance indicators and improvement opportunities. So specific to this project, the key objectives are as follows: to review and analyze the activity worksheets in order to determine staff capacity, capability, and service levels, to better understand the time and effort and allocation of work and the sustainability of these capacity levels. Based on that is to be able to identify opportunity to meet any new or increased demand from customers and make recommendations on how Springwater can meet these service levels today and in the future, and how we can align that to best practices. And then outline gaps or savings based on the capacity and capability and output expectations. So the focus of today is really around that first bullet point about understanding the analysis and the insights that came from the activity worksheets that Jazz had mentioned. Next slide. So this project was designed in order for us to capture robust, accurate data, both from a qualitative perspective and also a qualitative lens. We wanted to be able to generate insights that's understood the capacity levels of staff, but what were the drivers of those capacity levels as well. So to do this, the team started with document reviews. So we had the opportunity to review, as I had mentioned, the previous service delivery strategy that was created, in addition to 19 supporting documents that went into the development of that, and also related to service delivery within Springwater. But the primary data source for the quantitative analysis of the resource time, effort, and capacity was through the activity worksheets, which were completed by employees. So for each full-time employee roles, employees were able to capture key information related to the various tasks that they performed in the role, the frequency in which they performed those tasks, and the estimated amount of time that was spent performing each task. All activity worksheets were then reviewed by our team, transferred into a standardized template so that we could ensure accuracy and consistency of data when analyzing both across roles, departments, and the organization as a whole. Any discrepancies within the worksheet were identified and discussed during employee interviews. All activity worksheets were evaluated by both the CSPN team and leadership within Springwater. Finally, all the capacity figures were input into a resourcing data model in order to uncover insights at that organizational, departmental, and individual role level. From a qualitative perspective, our team has been able to conduct interviews and workshops with both full-time employees and outside employees. A total of 25 full-time employee sessions were conducted virtually through Zoom, which engaged over 40 participants. The team, including myself, had an opportunity to go on site just under a month ago to interview 28 outside employees. And this was a really important engagement component for us, is giving individuals an inclusive and safe space to show employee sentiment and uncover their insights into how their current workload capacity experiences. In addition to these two research elements, within the report, we've included a comparator scan looking at surrounding municipalities, including Oro-Medonte, Midland, and Clearview. And the objective of the scan was to understand how different municipalities are organized from an organizational structure, but also a headcount structure as well, to understand any discrepancies in service delivery. And finally, what came out of this stage of the project were the standardized template for consistent data capacity, a comprehensive data model for accurate quantitative analysis, and a capacity analysis report and presentation, which we're sharing out today. Next slide, please. So as mentioned earlier, the data captured in this project was both done at the qualitative and the quantitative level. And in order to create a seamless report structure, we align that to the township's budgeting report structure. So to simplify this, the qualitative write-up sections created a general administration category, which included the CAO, people and talent, IT and communication, finance, clerks and bylaw. And then we had fire and emergency services, building services, planning services, and infrastructure and operational services, which also included the outside employees. To provide relevant quantitative analysis, the general administration department was then further subdivided into the CAO and HR service lines, IT and communication, finance, clerks and bylaw. The remainder of the department stayed the same at the quants level. This same structure was then applied at the individual role level. And really the purpose of this was to be able to identify themes and insights both across the organization and down the organization. Next slide, please. So now we're going to start by talking about some of the insights and findings that we found at the organizational level. Next slide, please. First click. Wonderful. Across the township, we found that employees are working over capacity to meet current service delivery standards. The average capacity across the township is 125%. Now, it's important to remember that capacity has been measured as all roles being filled. So within the report, you'll see that we've identified specific roles and specific departments which have current vacant positions. However, all figures demonstrated within this presentation and the corresponding report are calculated assuming that these roles have been filled. So to help contextualize and standardize the analysis of capacity levels, what we did is we created a resource sustainability scale, and we applied this scale both at the organization, the department, and the role level. So to quickly go through the different metrics of the scale, because you'll see this appear throughout the presentation, any capacity over 115% has been deemed high risk for burnout. Individuals and departments that fall within this are not able to meet current service demand levels. The workload relative to resource availability is not sustainable. For capacities levels that fall within 105 to 115%, we've deemed this moderate risk for burnout. Resources are sometimes able to meet service demand levels. However, we look at this as short-term sustainability. When we get to the 90 to the 105% range, we call this manageable workflow. So resources here are able to consistently meet service demand levels within the short to medium term projections. And then finally, anything below capacity levels of 90% is deemed positioned for growth. So resources, departments, and the organization, if fall within this category, are able to meet the service demand levels today and likely those within the future. So as you can see from our analysis, the township as a whole is deemed high risk for burnout. Now, it's important to note within this analysis, we have not factored in the lens of growth, and we'll talk about this throughout the presentation. One of the major sentiments that we heard was a consideration for the population growth that Springwater is anticipating. And so these figures and these numbers are reflective of volume today. It's anticipated with growth, this will likely only increase, as you can imagine, more people, greater volume of service, which could also lead to an increase in the complexity of service as well. So once we were able to calculate what that capacity is, we wanted to understand the why. And really, it came down to 4 key factors. One, and most prominent, was the volume of work. All departments and roles cited a high volume of work and demand for services. This has required them to put in additional time and effort to complete in-scope work tasks. Often for many roles, the work that they were required to complete was to support other individuals within their department to complete overall departmental work. So this was work that was either vertically below or horizontally related to their role level. On the plus side, many people took a team approach to this, and the morale amongst teams was that of a supportive nature. And people have been putting overtime hours, both during the week and weekends in order to complete this, but have often cited that this is not sustainable. The second factor that we looked at was uncertainty of roles and responsibilities. And so the high volume of work, as I had mentioned, was causing people to complete tasks that were vertically below or horizontally related to their function. What this drove was uncertainty in roles and responsibilities. And this was most prominent, and we'll talk about this in further detail, amongst the management and leadership level. Oftentimes, leaders across departments were citing having to complete administrative and customer service related tasks that weren't directly correlated to their job role. But again, going back to that cultural indication that we found, people were willing to put in the time and effort to help their employees, but doing so at a pace that was just not sustainable. And so the compounded effect of the high volume of work leading to uncertainty in roles and responsibilities has also resulted in challenges around hiring and retention. And this was seen across all departments. Employees are voicing frustrations with how much work they have. It's decreasing morale amongst individuals and amongst teams. And this is also resulting in, an increase in turnover. Since 2016, Springwater has seen over 300% increase in employee turnover. This has further fueled hiring and retention challenges as well. Notably, one of the comments that we heard was relative to surrounding municipalities, Springwater is being viewed as a temporary short-term training ground for employees. And the reason people are looking at Springwater in this way is, one is the culture, which is being impacted by the work volume, and two is the non-competitive compensation packages relative to some of the larger surrounding municipalities. And so work volume aside, being able to meet current capacity challenges, being able to now hire for positions, both which are in the current resourcing model and in the projected resourcing model, is becoming a significant challenge, both for internal office employees as well as outside employees. So with the hiring and retention challenges also came training and onboarding and efficiencies. What we were hearing across departments is tenured staff don't have time to adequately train new employees when they are able to actually hire them and bring them on board. And as a result, the time it takes for an individual to become productive in their role is becoming longer and longer. Teams are doing the best they can within this environment to work, but what's happening is people are now carrying over workload on their role into other individual roles as well. Next slide, please. So now that we understood the organization as a whole is operating over capacity, we've understood the four main drivers that are resulting in this overcapacity. What we wanted to do and what was captured in the activity worksheets was, where are people spending their time? And so in order to standardize the analysis of this across the township, we've created 4 categories, and we worked with the employees to take the tasks that they had detailed in the activity worksheet and allocate it to these core categories. So the first one being core function. So time allocated to this is time being spent on tasks that are required to complete the objectives and the responsibility of the role. So these are truly job-specific tasks. Administrative support is time being spent on tasks required to meet daily operational requirements. And these are typically tasks that are outside the core function. So these would be things like scheduling meetings, updating timesheets, and assisting other roles and departments. Third being customer service. And this is time spent on tasks that are required an individual to either respond to or resolve a customer inquiry or complaint. And then finally, we had internal commitments. And so this is the time being spent on tasks to uphold commitments required to the role. So these would be things like attending training, meetings, conferences, and professional development. So across our organization, we found the majority of time is being spent on core tasks, which is aligned to role and strategic operational priorities. However, further analysis showed that the 2 key areas that are driving the majority of overcapacity work across roles and across levels is administrative support and customer service support. And this has been seen in different capacities across departments, and we'll talk to some of those nuances in just a moment. So next slide, please. So as we mentioned earlier, the activity sheets allowed us to conduct a robust quantitative analysis to measure capacity, again, at the organizational level, the departmental level, the role level, to be able to understand where are people spending their time aligned to the 4 categories that I had just reviewed, to be able to understand what are those categories that are driving overcapacity within their role, and to complement that, the focus groups and the interviews that we were able to do with the FTE and the outside employee provided a sentiment analysis to understand better the why of what's happening and how are employees feeling. Because a major consideration in all of this is not just the hours that are going in to complete the work, but how is that shaping culture around Springwater? And what are the impacts to employee well-being? And how is that going to impact the future success of the organization? And so in order to do this, what we did is we were able to conduct the analysis and assess the qualitative human resource impacts of employee capacity across the township. And the 4 categories that we have aligned these to are motivators. So motivators are the impacts that employee attitudes and behaviors have on capacity. Alignment, which speaks to the impact that tasks, which are beyond traditional job descriptions, have on capacity. We looked at competencies, which is the impact that skills and training has on the role to meet capacity requirements. And we looked at efficiencies, so the impact that any inefficient processes and technologies could have on capacity. So the following sentiments that I'm going to share, again, are at the organizational level. So we were able to distill common themes that we heard between roles and between departments. And coming out of this, we'll also share some very department-specific findings as well. So as I alluded to earlier, there's a strong sense of staff commitment amongst departments. It truly is a team approach to get the work done that needs to get done today. However, the sustainability of this is questionable. More so now than ever, staff are showing signs of burnout, and this is demonstrated by the 300% increase in turnover that Springwater has seen recently. Staff are doing the work because they believe in the better purpose of the organization, but they've also are very vocal in that this is not sustainable and it's not motivational for them to keep and continue to do work that's below their current level. One of the more notable findings that came out of this, and again, consistent across departments, was that employees have imposed a self-restriction on taking vacation. And the reason for this is twofold. One is they don't want to offload the work to their peers who would have to backfill for their position while they're off. And 2 is the fear of returning to work with unmanageable workloads. So as you can imagine, the fear of taking time off after already have working significant overtime is further breeding that negativity and the culture and the strain and the burnout, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And what staff has cited numerous times is the only reason they're able to get done what they're doing right now is this codependency on multiple roles. But as we had talked about earlier, that codependency is resulting in misalignments. And so the next category we're focusing on is around alignments. And this is truly the lack of role clarity. And as I mentioned, what's breeding lack of role clarity is this need for every role at every level to wear multiple hats to get work done, not only within their department, but across departments, because interdepartmental work is ultimately impacting what they're able to do. So this has led to diminished productivity, which is really truly being driven by lack of resources and employee turnover. And as mentioned earlier, where we're seeing the implications of this is at that leadership and at that management level. A lot of leaders, managers, directors are spending time doing administrative customer service tasks, which isn't allowing them to spend time on strategic priorities or operational improvements that will advance the township further, that could help rectify some of the situations that are happening right now. But every day, and this is a quote direct from employees, is spent firefighting, getting the things done that the town needs to just operate to get to the next day. And so they're seeing a strain and a lack of morale amongst those groups. Next slide, please. So understanding the motivations, we've understand role alignment. Part of role alignment is being able to look at the competencies. Do people have the skill sets that they need right now to do their job effectively? Because we know without the right skills, people can't be productive, diminished productivity leads to increased workload. And so what we found is, as I'm sure you're aware of, many of your staff are highly tenured and do have institutional knowledge. So the problem wasn't being able to develop necessarily the knowledge to do the job in the long term. It was the challenge with the process of getting people and giving people the space and the time to train adequately, as I had mentioned earlier. So when new employees onboard, giving them and management time, dedicated time to be able to do that. Another major consideration, again, is with a high turnover rate, is the loss of all this institutional knowledge. And this was something cited, again, both within internal FTEs as well as outside employees, is that there's no central database repository where all this institutional knowledge is being saved so that it can be passed on to the subsequent roles. And again, not having that knowledge, not being able to pass it down, ultimately is impacting productivity, both in the short and the long term. When we looked at efficiencies, and one of the key considerations I want to make sure that we call out is capacity and workload considerations can be resolved sometimes with technology, improved processes. So we wanted to understand how can that help enable or support some of the capacity considerations and the workload. And what it came down to ultimately was that people don't have time to allocate to strategic initiatives that would help identify some of these opportunities to drive improvements across the organization. A great example of this is Citywide. So the implementation of Citywide has been partially successful to date. Where the utilization hasn't been where it is right now is lack of dedicated resources to support with the implementation, the rollout, the training to help relevant departments get up to speed with the knowledge that they need to be productive in their roles. We can get into a little bit more detail around the nuanced findings that we found related to building and how that impacted IT there. But what employees had cited time and time again is that, yes, there are some manual processes. Those likely aren't going to change, but it's not the processes, it's not the technologies that's going to drive change in the organization. It's the number of physical people that they can have to support them with the workload. And the more people they have, the more time leadership can allocate to some of their strategic priorities to help identify these inefficiencies and help drive improvements. The other consideration that we looked at around efficiencies and a theme that came up time and time again across departments was around shared service and delivery redundancies. And so, as I mentioned earlier, one of the key categories where individuals were spending a significant amount of overcapacity time completing was customer service. And so right now, service inquiries are being managed by all individuals at all different levels. There's no kind of one centralized way to manage that. And as a result, you have everyone from director level through to clerk level and everything in between, including bylaw, managing service-related inquiries and requests that are not necessarily related to their department or related to their role. And so this increase in volume of work through misallocation is driving significant capacity constraints. Go to the next slide. So at an organization, that was the key themes that we heard. Again, remembering that overcapacity number was 125% as a township as a whole. And what we wanted to do is just quickly go through at a departmental level some of the key insights, both from a quantitative and qualitative perspective. So next slide. So as you can see here, all that's being illustrated here is every department within Springwater is operating at overcapacity. You'll see fire and emergency services is the closest to that 100% capacity mark. But to provide more context to this and to better understand the why, I wanted to share some more specific or nuanced examples to each of the departments. And just recall general administration, just wanted to show that that includes the following services that are listed within the box there. So let's start to dissect and understand the why at a departmental level. So the first section being general administration. So this one has been deemed high risk for burnout. And really what is driving high risk for burnout at this level is the misalignment of roles and responsibilities and the inability for management to allocate time to focus on those strategic and operational priorities. So again, going down within general administration to some of the service level offerings, I just wanted to highlight a few examples. So for the CAO role in particular, what is driving significant overcapacity there is not being able, given the volume of work, The CAO is often finding time is spent completing administrative tasks, but also tasks related to the manager and director levels. So in the report, you'll notice that there is an executive assistant level that's being recruited currently right now for the CAO. So this will reduce some of the overcapacity, but still puts that position well over capacity of where it should be. And that administrative assistant will be taking on some of the administrative duties. Specific to people and talent, what is driving a lot of the overcapacity there is unclear roles and expectation and ambiguity within processes. So an example of this is within the hiring process. So who owns the job description? Who owns recruiting, retention, and hiring? And so right now that's being somewhat centralized, but also dispersed across departments. And so this lack of clarity is causing timelines to be delayed. And this lack of clarity, again, is a result of all the additional tasks that these individuals are required to keep up with. And so when hiring can't keep pace, this is when good talent goes out the door. And we've seen this both within FTEs, and I know the struggle that they have right now for outside employees to hire seasonal workers, especially with snow coming up. Again, specific to people and talent as well, there are some manual processes that are time sensitive and require additional effort, but it's really the culmination of volume of work, unclear roles and expectations, which is leading to poor morale within the team. When we look at IT, the major challenges that they're facing right now, again, is just related to sheer volume. And so IT is responsible, while some of it is outsourced to a third party, they truly are responsible for the core of IT services to keep the township functioning. And so a couple considerations that's driving surges in their volume to manage those daily operational requirements. As new employees become onboarded, the amount of time spent to get them up and running is fairly significant.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mayor Allen. I don't know if the screen is progressing, the slideshow is progressing. I think you might be well ahead of what I'm seeing here on my screen.
You know what? It's within general administration are all these sub-services. So the next progression is going to be the fire and service department.
Okay, but to the point just made, this is a little different than the presentation. We're trying to follow I'm trying to follow the presentation that was on the agenda as well. But anyways, we'll leave it to you to reconcile.
Yes, now maybe if you flip back to the next slide, that might be helpful. And sorry, if you just go backwards. What I can do is, so I was speaking to the CAO people and talent. We were speaking to IT there right now. So this was all under the general administration category.
Okay.
And then I'm going to get into the details of the other one. I didn't have specific points called out on that slide for general administration, but we can absolutely go back and add that if required.
No, you go ahead. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So yeah, Janelle, we'll keep here until we get to fire and emergency services. Thank you. Perfect. So specific again, I was saying to IT, what really is driving there again is the volume of work to support the daily operational requirements of the township. And what's falling to the wayside as a result of that are strategic projects and priorities. So the two notable ones that were cited was number one, which is security and compliance, which is obviously a key concern and consideration for the township. And so the individuals right now have cited not being able to dedicate enough time to understand the needs of the township today for that and how that will also evolve within the future. And again, going back to that citywide example, and where that came into play was that project was initially owned by the CBO, who had left the organization due to burnout, and then was then transferred to IT to own. And that, again, lack of role clarity there, but also now requiring multiple departments to jump in and manage a project, which wasn't initially allocated for this year, has caused strain and an inability to focus on different areas. When we look at the clerks and bylaw department.
Ms. Cryer, can we pause for a sec? I see CBO over Stratton put his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, it's City View that we use, not Citywide.
Sorry, my apology.
Okay. All right, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. When we're looking at clerks and bylaw, really the biggest drivers of workload volume there are for clerks specifically just the increase in number of meetings and the time and work effort that's required to prepare for those meetings. And so even with what they are today, knowing that they'll likely increase in the future, the current resourcing model is not able to support that within the 100% capacity range. And for bylaw, they had recently recruited in another individual to bylaw enforcement. But what's happening with the volume within bylaw is forcing them to prioritize either in-office tasks or in-field tasks. And oftentimes what happens is in-field tasks gets deprioritized. However, not being able to respond to customer requests in a timely manner is then just further fueling and driving more customer requests that then have to be dealt with both in-office and in-field. And so there's the competing priorities there, and being able to manage both. And then from a finance perspective, where we're seeing a lot of the volume, one of the key areas is around the water billing. So we know that water billing is on a 4-month cycle, and many of the residents can often become confused with that. And so every 4-month period, that generates a huge surge in requests and questions. And so in addition to managing the volume of water bills, plus the additional customer questions and requests that go with it, that's a key consideration for resource strain there. And I think it's important to note with that one, I think this is a great example of how a process change isn't going to change that. So specific to water billing, being able to change the process or update the technology is not a feasible option. So that volume associated with that task isn't projected to change anytime soon. If anything, that will only go up as the population within Springwater goes up and more residents are using the service. So Jen, if you could jump to the next slide, please, and then we'll continue with the order. So drilling down, so that again, all of those service lines fell within general administration. So the next department that we looked at an independent level was fire and emergency services. And this one, if you recall, was at 103%. So they ranked at the moderate risk for burnout. And what put them at that, again, was the dependency on the contingent volunteer firefighter base. So right now, in-office employees prioritize in-office work when they're able to, leverage volunteer firefighters when required, but are often required to be in field during emergency calls. So obviously emergency situations become prioritized, office work becomes deprioritized. And this department truly takes a collaborative team approach to get the work done. All the individuals cited an opportunity to help each other out when they were able to be able to pass on tasks in the event people need to leave the office and attend in-field requests. One of the more notable insights for fire and emergency services was just the breadth of responsibility for the division chief and prevention, and looking at the scope of work that he's responsible for. So everything from public education and events, inspection, plans, reviews, emergency response, training, admin role, and just knowing that implications to that as the population continues to grow and being able to manage and juggle that. But of all departments, this one has been able to hold strong and kind of work within that moderate capacity range. The next one is building services. And so building and planning were very similar in some of the themes that we had that we were able to uncover. So just for context, across building and planning, just the sheer increase in volume has been one of the biggest drivers for overcapacity. And to put that into context, typically a year, the building department would receive requests for 600 permits. They reached that by June. And so they're now in a position where they're looking to double, if not 2.5 times increase what capacity requirements are with the resources that they have in place right now. And so the strain that they have both on kind of the core functions and some of the administrative staff has been significant. Many staff have cited working 10 to 12 hours a day to just keep their head above water. And this was a direct quote from one of them, is time is really the biggest enemy. The large volume of permits and inquiries is causing them to be distracted from completing some of their core tasks. And so Similarly, that same volume is being felt within the planning department. But to compound that, the planning department right now is short 2 staff, which they're currently trying to backfill, which one individual is on maternity and one's on paternity leave. But going back to the hiring and onboarding and retention challenges that Springwater is experiencing, it's been very difficult for them to fill that role to date. But even then, the capacity figures that we have reflected for planning are assuming that those 2 roles are filled. And so often what's happening is they just can't keep up with the backlog. And so in this instance, the director of that department is often doing work to support with the permitting and the processing of applications. And then finally, we had infrastructure and operational services. And they were also deemed high risk for burnout. And what was driving this and the large volume of work, again, was really around the administrative and customer service activities that the leadership and management level was required to complete. And within the infrastructure and operational services, you'll recall we had also included the outside employees. And I think I just wanted to highlight a few findings that we had in speaking to all the individuals that we met with in person. One of them was around, and this really came to light with the training, was a major issue. And this was seen predominantly with many of the tenured employees that had been there. They felt they were not given the time to receive adequate training to use the equipment that they were expected to use. And the opportunity to be trained effectively was not given just because of the volume of work that needed to get done. And so a few employees had cited times where they were in a vulnerable position to do tasks and work that they were not necessarily comfortable to do, related back to training. One of the other aspects with training is that specific to outside employees, training has not been documented or centralized. From what we understand, there is a project underway to do that. The individual that is completing that project is also stretched in trying to manage multiple priorities to prioritize this, but there's been no centralization or documentation of training that outside employees have completed. So in the instance where someone hurt themselves and we need to go back and say, Joe was actually trained on how to use the snow removal machine, here's the sign off, here it is. That's not in place right now. They're working towards that, but the person that's managing that program is also operating at overcapacity. The findings around role clarity were very prominent too within outside employees. Oftentimes people hired within Parks and Rec were doing the work for roads and maintenance and vice versa. And again, back to there is this notion of teamwork and collaboration to get the work done. But the lack of role clarity is also causing frustrations amongst the staff that are there today. And when talking to the supervisors across all the departments for outside employees, is having better defined roles and expectations and allocating the appropriate number of resources to do that will allow them to be more efficient in how they're completing their core activities. So those were some of kind of the key highlights from an outside employee perspective. So Jenna, Janelle, sorry, if you don't mind flipping to the next slide. And just to conclude before we wrap into question and A, again, this is just meant to show you on a scale relative to one another what the resource capacity is for each department, remembering that as a township as a whole, Springwater is sitting at 125%. You can see infrastructure and operational services is the highest, sitting at 146. And as I had mentioned earlier, fire and emergency services is more around that moderate burnout level at 103%. So with that, I wanted to pause there and open the floor to questions, and any questions, comments, both at an organization level, department level, that we can provide more context and clarity to.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cryer. Before we open it up to all of council, I'd like to turn it to the chair of the Service Delivery Ad Hoc Committee, Councillor Anita Moore, for her initial thoughts, comments, and questions. Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much, Mayor Allen. Could I just have the screen put back to full screen, please.
Of course, Janelle, you
I can see everybody. Thank you. I have a couple of comments. First of all, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the consultants at CSPN and their team for completing this very comprehensive and thorough report and working tirelessly in order for council to have the results for budget time. I do appreciate all the effort. I would also like to thank our committee members, especially Director Radigan, Clerk Gainsworth, who both put in a great deal of time and effort into completing this work. Also, Councillor Ritchie and Deputy Mayor Coughlin for participating in the committee work. I have said all along I felt this would be the most important work to have done in order to move the township ahead in a great position, and I still feel that way. Over the course of the last 2 budget cycles, Council had voiced some frustration in not being able to see the justification or the data related to the needs and asks of the various departments. This request for additional substantiated information resulted in the service delivery review. The consultant has now provided an unbiased perspective and has found that all departments are working over the 100% threshold, and that the risk for staff burnout is real and our turnover in staff is also very real. We need stability and we need staff satisfaction. Coincidentally, you can see that the program changes being requested this year align with the consultant's findings, and even if all program changes were approved, some departments would still be over the 100% threshold. I would ask that council please consider the results of the consultant's report and findings when pondering the program changes in this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. We will open it up for questions or comments. Can I just get a clarification, please, Ms. Cryer? When you say that, let's take, for instance, planning, where we do have the paternity leave and the maternity leave of two of our planners, are you including them as working full time to then come up with the capacity numbers that we've seen here? So, and when we're recruiting somebody, do you include them as presumed to be hired when you look at these capacity numbers? I just was a little unclear about what the assumptions are as a result of these capacity numbers.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. So what we had assumed was that the activity worksheets were filled out by individuals, assuming that those roles were filled. And so the numbers would actually be significantly higher if we had asked the individuals in their current roles right now to complete them, managing the workload that they are with the vacant positions. So all activity worksheets were completed with a lens of assuming we have full resources within our department. How many hours are you working to get the work done? Because what we didn't want to do is provide you with data that is kind of time boxed based on vacant positions.
Thank you. All right, Council, Director Radigan, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to members of council, I wanted to provide just further clarification to Ms. Cryer's comments. So the majority of, let's say, for example, planning, if there were vacancies, we did have a Director Spagnol review and add input and provide worksheets based on both senior planners that are currently on paternity and maternity leave. And in other areas, a good example would be, I believe the prior CBO had completed a activity worksheet for his existing role. And it was reviewed by our current CBO, and the deputy CBO was previously completed by the deputy CBO, who is now our CBO. So essentially, almost every worksheet was completed and provided to CSPN for review.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Council, comments? Councillor Hanna?
Thank you. Through the chair to you, Ms. Cryer. I realize that it's a difficult review to do because it's not like the end of the day you can count the number of widgets that everybody produces. So you have to use assumptions, you have to do interviews and so on. My question is, did you find anything that the township staff are required to do, any processes or jobs that they have to do that maybe could be eliminated, that are redundant, and so on. And the reason I asked that, even when you mentioned the water billing that's coming in quarterly and how much work it generates at that time of the year or quarter. At one time we got our license plates, everybody had to go and line up and get them on the same expiry date. Now they do it on birth dates to stage it so it's not a workload. And I know your job maybe is not to find recommendations on how to improve things, but I would suggest that that's one thing that we could be doing differently. We could do the water bills maybe by different zones in the township, maybe by wards or so on. So my question is, did you identify anything like that we could either eliminate, we don't have to be doing, or that we could be doing better?
Ms. Cryer?
Yeah. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. That's a great question. I would say the one major observation we had around that was just the centralization of how customer questions and queries are being managed. Right now, as you I'm sure all know, there's many different ways residents can get in contact with Springwater, and that's resulting in their questions going to multiple people, multiple departments, and multiple levels, which is also driving inefficiencies. And so there was one opportunity around that. Understanding the kind of the minutia from a process perspective was not a key focus of this project. Really, our focus was understanding on what are the tasks that people are doing today. Are they mandatory in terms of meeting operational and daily requirements for the township, and how much time is being spent on it, and what is the frequency of that time? And so when talking to the employees, there was nothing that was cited saying there's redundancies in this outside of the managing resident inquiries, where they felt like they weren't able to remove from their current roles.
Thank you.
Councillor Mont Chapman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to you. Just wondering if COVID took a huge part of the capacity challenges, or when you interviewed, were the challenges before COVID and COVID just didn't help the situation?
Ms. Cryer?
So we had the opportunity to interview people as recent as a month ago. And so this was, I mean, if we consider a month ago kind of post-COVID. So the impact and what they're experiencing right now is, I think, is as close to steady normal state as we can predict. No one knows what the future has in store for COVID, unfortunately. But what they're experiencing now is as close to normalcy as possible. What I will say, though, for a lot of the in-office roles, giving people the opportunity to work from home and reducing commute time has actually increased their productivity. So they now have time back in their day. I mean, there's other implications in the sense that it's fueling burnout and fatigue, and there's other elements to that. But I wouldn't say that where they are right now, the capacity that we looked at, I believe is sustainable going forward. Also, what this is not including, as well as I mentioned, as I kind of catch myself saying sustainable going forward, is the impact of population growth on Springwater. So as I had mentioned at the onset of the presentation, these capacity figures in no way are forward projecting of how they're going to manage surges in volume related to capacity.
Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I found the presentation very interesting. I did make a number of notes on some key points. To be quite honest, I have to take everything. I'm a bit of a skeptic, quite a bit. So looking at the report and looking at even the report itself, as you said, some roles, there seems to be a repetition. Somebody's doing one particular thing, and then you'll find that mimicked on other staff reports. But I did want to just kind of make mention of a couple of things when we're talking about the training and that they're not signing off. I don't know if that's something that's fallen through the wayside, but I can think back to that's exactly what the process would be. If you weren't trained to work on a piece of equipment and you hadn't been signed off on it, you weren't permitted to. So I would think that would still be the policy in place, because that's all about risk management right then and there. And another part that kind of caught me off guard was not really knowing what their roles might be when they were talking about Parks and Rec, assuming snow removal duties in the wintertime. That's been an ongoing process in this township for years and years and years. So it's not something that I think confuses them. I think maybe it was something that there was a bit of backlash to or reluctance to engage in. And that might be what you were actually hearing, because that is normal practice. It's not a deviation from what's been done in the past. One of the key points that you mentioned was the customer service aspect. And I can certainly see how, I can't imagine no one in Springwater Township not engaging in customer service, because at some point in time, things do get escalated. So everybody's going to spend time on that at some point in time. Obviously, those that are in a position to do it on a regular basis are going to be doing it for a larger percentage of their time. But I think one of the things that you may have touched on that does create some confusion is when you have someone who is a receptionist who picks up the phone and directs your call. I think that's very important. Auto attendants are wonderful. However, they're also wonderful at misdirecting calls, and that does cause different people to have to look into the matter on more than one occasion. Even if the right person gets it, they might still have to give it to somebody else, but quite often the wrong person is getting that call. Also, when you spoke about prioritizing and folks were having some difficulty with that, I understand that the tasks at hand and the number of tasks at hand would certainly play into that, but prioritization is something that we do innately day in, day out. And it's something that, depending on what the person's position is within this organization, things change, and sometimes they can change very rapidly. Maybe not so much at the front counter, but certainly at the CAO's office, in the fire chief's, fire director's office, or operationally out on the roads when different things happen. So I just wanted to say that although there's a number of things that were in the report, and a number of things that you alluded to, I think some of them have to be balanced and tempered with the reality of what staff's going on. So I do see room for improvement, but I also see this room for improvement in the processes and the policies that we have in place.
Okay, a lot of points there. Ms. Cryer, do you have comment on the points?
I do, yes. And let me, hopefully I can get through all of them. So the first one was around the snow removal. I just wanted to provide clarity on that comment. And again, this is what we heard in interviews with kind of the front line and also the supervisors as well, is that within the culture today, it's a voluntold position to be able to be available to do snow removal a certain number of weekends a year. And I think from a cultural perspective, many employees have voiced frustrations with that. Things come up, life happens, and if they're told that they need to participate in this program, then, so that was the comment more aligned to that. In addition to that, where, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, was the difficulty with hiring and retention. This was also heard with the outside employees. Specifically, many of them had cited comparables for surrounding municipalities, both in hourly wages for those roles and then contract duration. And so I know within that group specifically, both the supervisors and the individuals in themselves has said that they are having extreme difficulty hiring enough contract full-time snow removal individuals. So that helped kind of support the comment that I was making earlier around competitive talent packages and then resourcing models. Around training, the point that you had made around training, again, this was captured from interviews just over a month ago now. And as I mentioned, it was vocalized more with tenured employees, saying that they don't believe they were given adequate training and it wasn't documented. As I said, the process is in place right now to fix it, but the speed at which it can get fixed is being limited by the capacity availability of the individual that is driving that initiative. And then also around training was a number of people within outside roles had cited they would like to attend additional training to elevate their skill set within their relevant roles. And so whether that was getting a different driver license, using a different piece of machinery, they weren't able to take the time off work to attend training so that they could continue to develop in their role. Around the customer service program, I just wanted to be clear, that was one high level observation that came out. By no means am I in a position right now to make the recommendation to support centralization of that. What I will say to that point is many municipalities have been extremely successful with that. Going so as far as if you look at Durham 311, which is a great example, where they're actually looking to become the centralized customer service model for surrounding smaller municipalities. So calls will all get fed into there and then get handed off to select municipalities. So now it's going across, not just within. But the success of that is obviously highly dependent on individuals in the role, the training, and their ability to listen, interpret, and direct calls in an appropriate manner. But again, that was an observation. That is not a formal recommendation that we're making at this point in time. And then the comment around prioritization, absolutely everyone has demonstrated an ability to prioritize tasks within their job, within their role. Where the challenge that is being faced, again, especially at that leadership management level, is that they're now prioritizing tasks that are considered more daily operational ones just to keep the township running. And so things like processing water bills is a great example. Managing customer questions. These are things that just have to happen to keep the township operating from one day to the next. And they aren't able to prioritize some more of the strategic projects and operational efficiencies that they would like to focus on. And so it isn't about not being able to do it. It's not being able to dedicate the time to the projects that they would like to focus on because they're supporting their department, individuals within their department, and in some instances, individuals across departments.
Yep. Quick follow on, Mayor Allen.
Yeah, just 1 second before you do, Councillor Cabral, did you have a comment, Director Radigan?
No, Mayor Allen, I do
Okay.
believe CAO Schmidt does.
Yeah, I just see his card come up. CEO Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you to Ms. Cryer and Ms. Sorry, your last name, McCullough, I guess. My apologies. Just further to echo your comments with the customer service piece and the prioritization. So another perfect example is back in early 2020, our senior management team had started to have discussions about what I call service spring water. So no different than Service Barrie or Service Durham or Service King and all these other municipalities that have a centralized customer service type atmosphere, if you will. And so unfortunately, the date that I actually reached out to one of the municipalities to organize a tour to understand better how they actually are performing, COVID hit. And so unfortunately, everything shut down. We haven't had a chance to get back to that initiative. And I guess from a prioritization perspective, not that it's not a high priority, but obviously other things have come up since then. And again, it gets pushed to the corner of the desk and it unfortunately is not given the priority that is necessarily needed. So again, just an example of that piece that Ms. Cryer had spoken to, and just another example of exactly what she's speaking of. We're trying to manage the customer service piece. Unfortunately, other priorities get in the way, and we are where we are today, unfortunately. So,
Thank you, Councillor Cabral. Follow on.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Actually, that particular point there, I know that maybe it's possible for us to look down the road to working with the county. They have an input phone number similar to that, so who knows. My other question, I guess, and I'm sorry, I'm seeing Cryer up here, Jessica Cryer, so if that's not your correct
That is.
I apologize.
No, there's also Ms. Janelle McCulloch.
Okay, yes, McCullough. Yes, okay, apologize. I just wanted to ask whether or not, I know there were activity sheets. I don't know about anybody else on council, but I've not seen them or seen anything compiled from them as of yet. So I really don't know how they were developed or what they look like. But I did also want to ask you whether or not you were supplied with or had an opportunity to view the activity sheets that were already in being produced by the outside staff and the recreational department staff as well. They had activity sheets they had already been utilizing for years and years, whether or not you had access to those to use in your study.
Ms. Cryer?
Yes, so I'll answer the first part of the questions with the activity sheet. So the process that we undertook for that, for the FTE employees, was there was a template that was created prior to us being onboarded to conduct this review. We leveraged that. We augmented the template to standardize it better across all departments. And then we had the individuals complete those. And the reason we did that is to my earlier point, we wanted to be able to further subcategorize the tasks that individuals were completing. So within administration, you would see for one activity worksheet, there may be 35 different things people had done. They indicated how many hours they spent doing that. What was the frequency? So was it a daily, weekly, monthly, or annual requirement? And then any additional notes based on that. So all of that raw data was given to employees. We took it back, we reviewed it. It was also reviewed with leadership within the departments as well to validate. Because to an earlier comment, it's hard to calculate how many widgets someone's producing, right? Especially we're not sitting beside these people for a full year. So it did go through 3 levels of validation, if you will. Those files were then compiled into a resource capacity model. So we could then do the analysis and be able to compare by role, by level, and then at the organizational level. So it was as robust as we could be with the data that we were able to work with and collect from employees. And again, the interviews in the focus group helped us to validate those findings, to identify any discrepancies that we had seen, to clarify, and then to also further understand where their focus is. So hopefully that answered the question on activity worksheets. For the recreational staff, we did have an opportunity to see their the timesheets and where they're spending time. This review did not include a detailed analysis of that at a quantitative level. And the reason for that is, as you know, they're going through a unionization. They don't work overtime. So they're being, if their shift is up, their shift is up. And so for us, the messaging around there is not so much around the additional hours worked because they aren't able to work those additional hours. It's the inefficiencies that are happening as a result of capacity shortages. And what are some of the major implications that are resulting from that? A few other ones just to add to that we heard. Again, this is all from the qualitative perspective, but not having enough resources, for example, is not allowing the people in Parks and Rec to go through and do a proper assessment of all the trails prior to opening on a yearly basis. And so now you have residents within the town on trails that haven't been inspected. Another example that was cited was due to the shortage of individuals within the roads department. When there are at least 5 people on site, you're supposed to have a supervisor, but there just isn't enough resources to have a supervisor on site. So oftentimes they're working without a supervisor. And so that's not compliant, but then it also causes issues in the sense that when a resident comes up and is asking questions around what's going on, it's everyone's kind of looking at each other saying who's responsible for answering this. So hopefully that answers your question with the rec staff. Again, the focus for that was less on the hours because we know that has to hold constant, but it's what are the implications of not having enough staff on their current day-to-day roles.
Okay, other Deputy Mayor Coughlin.
Thank you, Marilyn, and through you to Ms. Cryer. Earlier in the presentation, you had spoke to not only the capacity, but the actual composition of our staff in comparators with Midland, Oro, and Clearview. And I was just curious if that would be coming forward as part of the final report, or if you happen to have those numbers with you.
Yeah, so within the sorry.
Go ahead, Ms. Cryer.
I'm sorry. Within the final report, what we've done is we pick those comparators to look at both organizational structures, so to identify the different role types within the departments, but then also headcount as well. So in the PDF Word document that was shared, that's all detailed there at a fairly granular level. You'll see in the appendix of the report, we get into the details of what that looks like.
Is that any follow-on, Deputy Mayor, or is that fine?
Oh, sorry, no, that's fine.
Councillor Hannah?
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to Ms. Cryer. In your report and in your comments today, you mentioned what I took as staff not liking or being frustrated by roles across the different departments, having to do a variety of tasks within departments, I guess. Personally, I would see that as a positive thing. It avoids being pigeonholed, and it gives an employee a variety of work to do, and also it's a developmental thing if you like for a higher position. So my question, I guess, to you is, why do staff see having to do a variety of different jobs as a negative?
Ms. Cryer?
That's a great question. So where we found this most common was individuals within more senior roles having to complete, again, the administrative and service tasks. So for a lot of people, they felt that they've done that role. They've worked on those pieces before. They're in the role that they are in now to be able to focus more on those strategic priorities, hence the career progression. So for many, it felt like I'm taking 2-3 steps below where I should be right now. And so the sentiment around those additional tasks, it wasn't about advancing any skill sets. If anything, it was flexing muscles that they've already flexed and developed in their previous career. They've now, in the role that they are in now, because they were brought in to focus on, again, like I said, those strategic priorities, those special projects. And now they're supporting the staff below them, because a lot of them had demonstrated great leadership skills and capabilities. And again, that willingness that we need to get the work done in our department. But the only reason that I'm doing this work is because I don't have enough people on my team to get the work done that needs to get done, so I can focus on what's required for me.
Thank you.
Other comments? Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Marilyn. I just wanted to get some clarity, I guess, with respect to, in particular, staff, the administrative staff, senior staff, with respect to working outside their normal hours. And I know that for some staff, that would be considered abnormal. As a matter of fact, I've been surprised a couple of times when I've, sent an email and got a reply on a weekend, because I wouldn't expect that from most staff wouldn't do that. So I'm wondering, on the activity sheets, would that type of communication and that type of work be included? Because some staff, if you think about it, they'll put in their day shift, and then some of them are expected to come to the evening meetings and things like that. And I don't know exactly how staff works that out. So it may look like there's a lot more hours being inputted, but I don't know whether or not they're compensated down the road, or whether they have the option to work less hours through a day and then come to that evening meeting. So was there any way for you to differentiate that, to see whether or not some of that was alleviated, or was it always that they were working more hours than necessary?
Ms. Cryer?
That's a great question. So the way that the activity worksheets were calculated is individuals listed all the tasks that are required of their role, agnostic of the timing of when it was required to complete and the number of hours that it took to complete it. And Director Radican, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but for the majority of roles for FTE employees, they were given, I believe, in lieu 2 additional weeks of time for overtime. But for every role that had worked overtime, that's negligible compared to the hours that they were required to work. So there was a small buffer that was allocated to say, you know what, we understand you're working overtime. Here's a time bank to make up for it, but nothing relative to what's actually required of them.
Director Radigan?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through you to members of council. I just wanted to agree with Mrs. Cryer, that is correct. But I do believe the way the majority of the worksheets were calculated, I believe there was an average number of hours that was allocated to position based on an assumption that they would get a certain amount of vacation. So this is in addition to, let's say, if an individual would take their allocated 2 to 3 weeks vacation. So this would include pretty much all the hours they would work in a year, on average, reducing the amount of vacation that would be allotted to them.
Okay. Any other comments, council? Certainly very, now, was there any further presentation, Ms. Disappeared, oh yeah, there you are, Ms. Cryer? Any further slides or?
No, that was the extent of the presentation. What we had included in the presentation deck, which you all received, which is repetitive to the information that's in the report. It's just a visualization of all the capacity levels by department, but no new information in the presentation.
So, Councillor Moore?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I was just going to ask Ms. Cryer if she could remind council what the rest of the project looks like and what you'll be looking at going forward. Thanks.
Ms. Cryer?
Yes, absolutely. So this is really stage one, which was the most comprehensive stage of the project, was going through the activity worksheets. What we're going to be looking at next is around KPIs, so identifying any key performance indicators that the township can use both at an organizational level and also a departmental level. And then to a point that was addressed earlier is any improvement opportunities. So anywhere that we can see outside of resource capacity, how can service delivery be better streamlined?
So on that, Ms. Cryer, there are some KPIs now which form part of the budget book. I think they qualify as KPIs. Have you looked at those, or are you going to be starting from scratch by department with respect to that exercise?
We have not looked at those yet in detail, so we'll be starting from scratch and then and working our way up. But any existing documentation around that will definitely be taken into consideration as we get to that phase of the project.
Okay, Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. And there was a point that I wanted to ask about it. When we were talking about service delivery and service demand at the very beginning, service delivery standard, you used that a number of times. And I know that some departments may have a service delivery standard. I don't think township as a whole has a service delivery standard. That was actually something that I was hoping would be developed down the road, service delivery standard for the residents, the taxpayers, what they can expect. Would you know whether or not the service delivery standard, was that something that a standard that you felt they were exceeding, or was that self-imposed standards within each department? That I'm just trying to figure out where that bar actually was. Because I don't think township developed it, but internally in each department, they may very well have a way to do that. But you used the term several times, so I'm looking for some clarity on it.
Ms. Cryer?
Yes, absolutely. So in some instances, there's legislated timelines. And so we saw those within planning and building in terms of the approval process, when you have to get back to residents. So those are more legislated ones. So those would be service delivery standards that the township needs to meet, which are being set outside of kind of township requirements. One delivery standard that was voiced a few times, and no one has been able to send it in a documentation, but that all customer requests would be responded to within 3 business days. And so there were some anecdotal standards that have been set, but part of this next phase of work is understanding what are the realistic ones given work capacity and so forth. And then any reference that I made to additional standards specifically to outside employees, those were all legislated ones. So things like 5 employees, you need a supervisor. There was another instance where when they're clearing a road, you should have 2 individuals in a vehicle. So those were all kind of more at the provincial level.
Okay. What is the timing of the next stage, Ms. Cryer?
So we are underway working through that now with an anticipated completion date of February, but Janelle, please correct me if I am wrong.
I see Director Radigan shaking her head to the positive, confirming it. Okay. All right. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Hanna?
Thank you, Mayor. And just an observation, page 99, Appendix B of the report, we do the comparison between Ormadonte and Springwater. I don't see a lot of difference in the total complement, only that the or Medante's structured some of their departments different than Springwater's departments. Is that accurate?
Ms. Cryer?
Yeah, that's accurate. So what we wanted to be able to do is, again, understand from an organizational structure how the roles were defined, because part of the observations that we heard within the interviews and the focus group was that how roles have been defined within Springwater is not necessarily consistent across other municipalities. What we unfortunately don't have access to for the selected municipalities is the actual volume of service requests that are coming in. So I can't say with 100% certainty that this is a role structure that makes sense based on a comparator from a service volume perspective. We're looking at it from a population lens.
Thank you. Follow up?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I just got to ask this question. On page 88 of the report, it has a comment that you've written in there. It says mandatory, voluntary weekend work. Mandatory, voluntary doesn't make quite sense. So I just wonder what the heck that was about.
Ms. Cryer?
Yes, that was in reference to the individuals that are doing snow removal. So it is a voluntary, quote unquote, in their own words, program. But when you listen to or read between the lines, it is mandatory that they're available 3 of the 4 weekends. And so to me, that's more of a cultural inconsistency of what they believe is they're being told, what they believe is fair. And so that's what that comment was in reference to.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds like it's synonymous with voluntold. So, Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you, Councillor Hanna, for the follow-up on that. My initial comment or question pertaining to the comparators was that when you were comparing, there was, economic development positions, there was environmental components, and that not being seen in Springwater. So you felt that there was an equivalent number of actual people doing the work, but it was just divided differently. Is that what I'm hearing?
Ms. Cryer?
Can I redirect that to Janelle? She did the analysis on the comparators.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Sorry, Mayor. In particular with Oro Mandante, one of the findings from that comparator was that how they utilize additional resources within the leadership and management levels as well. So they do have more, in addition with the infrastructure and operation type that would be similar. So within that one, they have more delivery service focused roles. So they have roles that are focused specifically on infrastructure and capital projects. Whereas when you see what we've heard in Springwater is those roles, there's no really clear designation for those types of specific type of roles. If you see within the operations and community department within the comparator, there's a great number of those management and coordinator roles. So that would be in comparison to within Springwater, how there is cited that there isn't a lot of the management leadership level is taking on a lot of those roles that have to do with the administration and customer service. So we wanted to give an idea of how it is structured and it's highlighting certain roles that comparators might have as more support roles. So then the management can focus on those strategic priorities that we did mention. And then in regards to, we did just point out the difference between the, say, economic development and environmental. We do understand that Springwater does outsource the environmental type tasks. And then the economic development was one that was not present within what we have seen in other municipalities as well. But then again, that just depends on strategy of the township. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. And just as a follow-on, Marilyn, if I can. So I think just when I was trying to use the comparators that were provided, it almost seemed like you said, the designated departments within Springwater that don't exist are sprinkled amongst staff that are there. And so in the recommendations, are you using these comparators as a guide to us, or were they just because they're a neighboring municipality?
The comparators, oh, I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mayor. The comparators were utilized as they had similar population size, and it's not being utilized as a recommendation per se, but to have that kind of benchmark to get an idea of what other municipalities are doing to help inform opportunities for a different structure.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments at this point? Well, thank you very much, ladies. Very comprehensive report and presentation today. We look forward to the continuation of it, and it's certainly given us a lot of food for thought and has validated a lot of things. So can I please have a mover and seconder to receive the report? Councillor Moore and Councillor Ma Chapman, that the presentation from Jessica Cryer, Managing Partner, CSPN, and Janelle McCulloch regarding the Service Delivery Review Resource Capacity Summary Report be received. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And again, thank you very much, ladies. Can I have a mover and seconder for the confirmatory bylaw? Councillor Cabral, Deputy Mayor Coughlin, that bylaw 2021-112 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council at the regular meeting held on November 25th, 2021, listed herein, be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? That is carried. And a mover and seconder to adjourn this meeting, please. Councillor Cabral, Councillor Moore, that the special meeting of the Township of Springwater is now adjourned at 4:26 p.m. to meet again in regular meeting on December 1, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. All those in favor? It is carried. Thank you. Thank you again. And we'll see you in a budget meeting in an hour. Thank you.